Hello. I took 2 months off because I got stressed about the book I'm writing, but I'm back and I'm in it. I'm so in it now. I went to the Tenements Museum the other day and they asked if anyone had read this book, and I did raise my hand and say yes, even though I'm only on page 601, and so that gave me the motivation to finish it out. Yeah, page 601, and it was exciting. We were talking a little bit about Mary, his wife, and that's all I remember. As for his wife, on those Saturday evenings at the Belmont Mansion, where Robert Moses sat hour after hour at the big table with no apparent intention of leaving, it was, of course, Mary Moses who was the most welcome person because she was the only one who could drag him out, a feat she sometimes accomplished by taking him firmly by the ear and leading him away from the table as if he were a little boy. For years, in all domestic matters, Robert Moses was led by his wife. Wait, hold on. Let me just make sure that's where I actually left off. I think it was. Well, let me see. I'm just going to say that's where I left off. The next chapter is another one that's called Changing. All right. Also, wow, hello. How are you? Yeah, sorry I took a long time off, but I'm back. I'm actually doing it now. Yeah, I don't really have a good explanation. I just got stressed about writing my book, and then I got out of the habit. We're talking about Mary Moses right now. For years in all domestic matters, Robert was led by his wife. If outside, he gave orders. At home with Mary and their two daughters, Barbara and Jane, he took them. He was a different man there, said Joe Ingraham. So different that if you only knew the public Moses, you'd hardly believe this was the same man. The Moses homes, the big rambling old Thompson Avenue house, and a Gracie Square apartment that he rented after coming into Bella's inheritance in 1930, were both sunny and cheerful. The apartment looked out on the busy East River and the towers of the Triborough Bridge, and casual, with deep, gaily slip-covered chairs and sofas, bright oil paintings, warm russet drapes, books piled all around, and if the foyer at the Thompson Avenue rolled up sails for Jane's sailboats. That's so cute. The atmosphere was as relaxed and casual as the atmosphere in his offices was intense, and the contrast extended to the man who lived in them. Moses was not home much. Oops, let me close this thing. He was generally out of the house by 9, usually returned after 8, and worked every Saturday. And when he was, a friend recalls, he always had that yellow pad on his lap. But the friend says he never acted busy or rushed at all, and he was easy and utterly gracious. When Jane and Barbara were young, he would make up stories to tell them, sit on the floor with them for hours, making animals out of clay, carry them around on his shoulders, teach them to swim and sail, take them on wonderful Sunday clam bakes on Fire Island. When they got older, I've never been to a clam bake. Is that something that you do if you're from New England? I've never done it. I'm from Michigan. I lost my place now. When they got older, he and Barbara, Jane early developed an anti-intellectual bias. What does that mean? He and Barbara followed the family tradition established by Granny Cohen by doing crossword puzzles together, including the difficult double cross stick in the Saturday Review. He was always delighted to have... Okay, so just a random thought is that I have a friend named Paolo Pasco, and if you do crosswords like a lot, you might recognize him. But he's my crossword friend. He's like a professional crossword and constructor. And I'm gonna ask him if he knows the double cross stick in the Saturday Review, and I'm gonna ask him if it's actually very hard. Also, hello. I am so excited to be back. I don't really have a good excuse for why I was gone. We're talking about Robert Moses at home because he's apparently a good dad. He was always delighted to have their friends in. The house was always filled with children, and Jane says, I cannot remember him losing his temper at us. It was he who walked the dog. They had a dog? We never hear about this. Generally took out the garbage, and often after working until long past midnight, arose at 6 or 6:30 to make breakfast. He loved to cook, Mary's sister, Emily Sims Marconier, says. No matter how early I got up, Robert would be in the kitchen and he'd like to know what I'd have, bacon or eggs or whatever. He dressed in the shabbiest of old khakis, a plaid shirt hanging out of his pants, sneakers, and one of the most incredible hats he loved. Okay, get ready. Get ready for the description of one of the most incredible hats he loved. Oh, wait. The battered old fedora was often replaced now by a transparent rain hat, which he cherished. Okay, I don't know what a rain hat is. Rain hat. Transparent. Um, okay, it kind of just looks like what Curious George wore or whatever. Um, like just like a old-timey hat you wear in the rain. Okay, crazy that he would wear the rain hat all the time. I need to star that. Always prepared for a rainstorm. There was, as a friend put it, absolutely no side to the man at all. He might have been a powerful man, but if you only saw him around the house, you would have never guessed it. His wife ran his home and his life to such an extent that, describing their relationship, many friends use the phrase, she mothered him. Mary bought his clothes, even his underwear and socks, bringing home suits until he found some he liked and then calling a tailor over to fit them. She gave him pocket money, says one of her friends. Before he had the limousine, she had to see he had car fare every time he went out. She had to make sure he had change for a telephone call and a few dollars for restaurants and whatever. In a restaurant, she would slip him the money for the check under the table. That's such a silly, because God forbid the woman pay. She paid all bills, even until he began to use Triborough accountants. She handled the income tax returns, tried to keep his weight down. She would dish out her husband's portion with a crisp, no gravy. Wow, I just want to know so much more about her. Um, and like the dynamics of their relationship, like has it always been like that, or did he start out more domineering and then she just was like, I can't live like this. I have to be the boss. I'm so curious. Or did he fall in love with her? Because when they met, she was like a secretary, right? Or something like that. They met in a professional context. Did I don't know, I wonder if he liked her because she's like this. Anyway, um she ordered him home from the office when he was working too hard and protected him from intrusive telephone calls with an acerbity that reminded visitors that she had once been called the power behind the governor in Wisconsin. Oh, right. She's Wisconsin. She was like the star assistant or secretary or something. See, this is why I shouldn't take 2 months breaks. I forget the details. She never complained about the financial privations that for years left her constantly worrying about grocery bills or the lack of ordinary social life. Moses went to no movies, saw no plays, had no hobbies except those connected with the water. Swimming, sailing, clamming. Clamming. Although she, as her sister puts it, did not particularly like the water. Her only concern, deep enough so that some of her friends refer to it as a real guilt feeling, was that Robert had badly wanted a son and she had not given him one. Mary was the boss in that household, her sister says. She ran their lives. She shared more than Moses' home life. In the years before he installed private dining rooms at his offices, she was the hostess for his luncheons, a brilliant and witty one. She knew how to handle politicians and reporters. At receptions, she would whisper the names of oncoming politicians in his ear because she was good at recalling individuals as he was bad. Wow, that's exactly like in Veep with what's his face? Gary. Has anyone watched Veep? I like totally hopped on the bandwagon. I watched season 1. Maybe that's why I haven't been streaming my reading. I'm too busy watching Veep. Okay, she brought a touch of humanity to his hard-driven men, asking them about their wives and children, arranging for doctors in hospitals when they were ill, and when her husband's empire burgeoned in resources, seeing that those resources were put at their service. When, for example, the 7-year-old daughter of the captain of the Park Commission's yacht, CF, died, Mary saw to it that the grieving parents didn't, as the captain's sister puts it, even have to buy a piece of bread. A chauffeured car came over and stood at the door all the time in case they wanted anything. She sent over food, enough to feed an army. And the car stayed there the whole 4 days. The body stayed in the funeral parlor. And later, every now and then, a big bouquet of roses would come with a card from Mary and Robert Moses for the cemetery. One thing she did that was especially appreciated by Moses's men was to call his office and say, "Bob's on one of his rampages. Everybody watch out." I need to underline that. That's very funny. Says one of his men, that would give us just enough time to get out of there before he arrived. For some of the young architects and engineers, she was a matchmaker and sympathetic shoulder to cry on. Arnold Vollmer, a young architect introduced to his wife Becky, a Moses research assistant, through Mary, says, "She was the sharpest, the most wonderful, brightest woman you ever met. She could be devastatingly caustic." One egoistic Lester Markle, Sunday editor of the Times, perturbed because he had been invited as Moses's guest to the Jones Beach Marine Station but had not been seated in Moses's box, made some remark that she overheard. Addressing some people around her in a voice just loud enough for Markle to hear, she said, "The trouble with Lester is that he thinks he's as smart as Robert, but he's not." She knew just what to say to help her husband. When LaGuardia asked her, quite seriously, why Moses respected Smith more than him, she replied, "Because he stood behind his commissioners." When her husband publicly insulted Iphigene Sulzberger, New York Times lady, it was Mary who healed the breach, and she was awed by no one. Proskauer recalls that the first time she met Smith after he had refused to endorse Moses for governor, and that was just the worst governor run ever. He's like J.D. Vance type, like fumbles in front of crowds. Not that I'm, anyway, I shouldn't have even said that. Okay, sorry, now I lost my spot. Mary absolutely withered him with a cold stare when Smith tried to embrace her as usual, turned on her heel and walked out of the room. She was a confidant and advisor, a respected one. Robert Moses never went anywhere without Mary, and he consulted her on everything, Sid Shapiro says. And boy, was she sharp. Attorney Morris Ernst, who, with his wife, saw a lot of the Moseses when the two couples were young, says, "Mary gave Bob an awful lot when he was first starting out. Don't forget, she had really been the confidential secretary to a governor. Her political know-how was really quite significant in helping him accomplish his early objectives. Moses himself told Mrs. Marconier that every time he pulled a boner, it was on something he hadn't consulted Mary about." Says radio commentator H.V. Kaltenborn. Also, yes, hello. Thank you. I'm excited to be back. The radio commentator says, "Those of us who are privileged to know something about the home life of Robert and Mary Moses realize how much a wife's unfailing patience and unselfish devotion have meant during years of strife and struggle. But as strife and struggle yielded success, the relationship between Robert and Mary changed. The change was evident at parties. As Mrs. Morse, the friend who admired both of them, put it, well, as a young man, he didn't dominate the conversation at parties so much, but it grew worse later. As he grew louder, she grew quieter. Talk to old acquaintances, and the adjectives used to describe Mary Moses are gay, charming, warm, witty, vivacious. Talk to acquaintances who first met her during the 1930s, and the adjective most heard is quiet. Attorney Monroe Goldwater, who didn't meet her until about 1936, says she was a nice person, but not very brilliant. Imagine if someone asked you to describe someone and you said that. That's a crazy. She's nice, but not brilliant. One woman who first met her about that year calls her a mouse. By the late 1930s, New York hostesses, anxious for the presence of Robert Moses at their dinner parties, were wondering what on earth to do about Robert Moses's wife. According to elegant Florence Shintag, the bright, brittle wife of Key Smith advisor Bernard Shintag and herself an attorney and judge, when they visited us, we always had to worry about who would sit next to her. She needed bringing out. She never spoke very much. She had nothing to say, I assume. She was a moon whose light was growing less and less. He was going on, a sun getting brighter and brighter. Wow, Moon Mary. That's what they should call her. Not that Mary seemed to mind. Mary was a darling, and she never got over her wonder that anyone like Bob should want to marry her, Iphigene Sulzberger says. She never thought that anyone so handsome, so brilliant, would marry anyone but the Queen of England, or someone like that. He was absolute perfection in her eyes. If the submission of her identity in his was causing her conflict, signs of that conflict emerge only obliquely, as in one interview she gave during the only period in which she consented to talk for publication, his campaign for governor in 1934. During this campaign, despite her wit and political insight and experience, she delivered exactly one speech, a talk at a small tea. The reporter who interviewed her wrote that Mary Moses suddenly inquired, "But why bother talking to the wife of the candidate? I don't think I'm a very interesting person to interview. I'm not spectacular. And on the other hand, you can't just do me as the home and mother woman, shelling the peas, mending. I can do those things. I can cook and I like to, but I don't. What can you say about a person like me? I know government because Mr. Moses has been a part of it always, but that makes me like a shadow of him, and that's not correct either." This makes me a little bit sad. And then, of course, there was another factor, one at which Florence Shintag hints at by saying, Mary became too old physically for him, I think. He continued to be so vibrant, so vital. Mary had what Hinda Hellman, Moses' cousin and a perceptive confidant, describes as an awful horror of growing old. The chapter is really making me feel sad about Mary Moses. But she was 4 years older than Robert, and the difference seemed to increase each year between her and the husband who seemed as impervious to time as the grandmother he so strikingly resembled in other respects, and who remained youthful and vital until her death at 93. He was still working his incredible daily schedule tirelessly, still swimming far out to sea in all weather, still energetic and dynamic in appearance at 40 and 50, his added weight making him look more powerful only, not older. Mary, on the other hand, aged hard, in the opinion of some friends, because of the strain of not only bringing up 2 daughters and running 2 households for years without maids when money was always tight, but always managing every detail in her husband's life. I think it drained her, Becky Vollmer says. In the opinion of other friends, because of what Mrs. Hellman describes as the strain of trying to live up to someone like Robert, who was almost larger than life. Her husband was, of course, fascinating to women. In part, this was because of his charm. I need to take a sip of coffee. Man, this is a bummer. Everyone that's close to him really doesn't do well, huh? Like his brother, his wife. Also, hello. Hi, Drew. Okay, one more sip of coffee. Also have to see where Pearl went. She's being weird. Okay, she's just like, she does this thing where she goes into the shelf and sits by the papers. Anyway, okay. Yeah, this is a really depressing chapter, but I don't know, it feels like the same level of depressing as the brother. Okay, let's see. In part, this was because of his charm. Joan Gans Cooney, later producer of Sesame Street. Okay, this is a really fun crossover to me because I was just on a total rabbit hole. about Sesame Street and Muppet history. And if you are in New York, you should go to the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens. I think it costs $20, which is rather steep for museums, but the Jim Henson exhibit I think was actually worth it. Probably. Anyway, okay. Joan Gans Cooney, later producer of Sesame Street, met him in 1954 at the scintillating Sunday Talk Fests at the Herbert Bayard Swope's mansion at Sands Point. At the time, she was 24 and he was 65, but she says, stop it. Is he going to have a love affair with a Sesame Street producer? Oh, it's so hard not to root for a Sesame Street person for me, but okay. She says, after I had spent the evening with him, I was in love with him. It crossed all generational lines, that charm of his, Joan Cooney says. What he has is this fantastic recall. He'd tell me what he thought of Tom Dewey and FDR. He has that ability to tell you a story so that you can see the people in the room. And he's just got that magnetism. Everybody in that room was interesting. He was she's my age. He was probably the least rich man in these gatherings because he was a public servant, and something about that came through that he had spent his life in public service. I saw him mostly with his contemporaries when their careers were on the wane, and they had changed in physical appearance, but his appearance hadn't changed at all. His wife? Oh, says Joan Cooney, she didn't talk at all. She was just a little bird who tried to worship him. I wonder, if they don't bring up Joan Gans Cooney again, I'm gonna be so upset. I really need to know what happened here. Like, did they have an affair or what? In part, Moses. Also, how did Robert Caro find her if she doesn't come up again? I feel like she'll have to come up again. In part, Moses' appeal was based on his power and fame. In part, it may have also been based on other considerations. Justice Florence Sheentag talking about Moses in general, stopped in the midst of a thought, sat thinking for a few minutes, and then said musingly, he must have been a wonderful lover. He's so direct. No underlying doubts. As a young man, he had been in love only once, with a fresh, clean-looking girl as passionately idealistic as he, whom he met among the books of the Municipal Research Bureau Library, and whom he loved with an intensity so vivid that his Yale classmates would remark about it decades later. By the 1930s, Robert Moses's affairs were openly gossiped about in New York political and society circles. Particularly his friendship with one of the city's most remarkable women, a North Shore baroness, with whom his name became linked at the time he was subordinating his idealism to an accommodation with the power of the North Shore barons. Which time? First of all, I don't know, just like to accomplish so much and then to swim to swim into the middle of harbors and bays like every day, and also to have time to have so many affairs. That's crazy time management. That's like, remember when that podcaster Andrew Huberman had a weird scandal where he like had a bunch of girlfriends at the same time? It reminds me of that. Like, how does he have the time? Okay, so who's this baroness? She was the witty and sophisticated Ruth Baker Pratt, widow of one of the Standard Oil Pratts of Glen Cove. Ah, yes, the Standard Oil Pratts of Glen Cove, who was not only an accomplished violinist, golfer, and tennis player, but a behind-the-scenes power in Republican politics. The first woman ever to sit on New York City's Board of Aldermen. Wow, Board of Alderwomen, more like. The first woman to ever represent New York in Congress, and possibly the only politician of either sex to ever best Jimmy Walker in repartee. Recalls Paul Wendell's. They were rather affectionate in their attitude toward one another in public, to an extent that it was rather shocking to me when I saw it. She was quite taken with him. It was well known in those circles that if they didn't get married, it wouldn't be Ruth's fault. If they didn't get married, it wouldn't be Ruth's fault. So he's just saying that Ruth wants to marry Robert Moses. Um, wow, Ruth Baker Pratt. And on one hand, it's like, okay, girl boss. On the other, I'm very curious what whatever disturbed Paul Wendell's, like, I want the details of what the openly affectionate behavior looked like. Like, was it just like a side hug? What are we talking? Are they kissing in public? Are they kissing in Congress? These are the details that I feel like TMZ and Page Six would have. Unfortunately, the power broker seems to be lacking. Moses still spent as much time with Mary as possible under the circumstances. His scrupulous courtesy toward her was as noticeable as ever. He never went on vacation without her. Truly, what a great husband. He never went on vacation without her. But the glow from the man she had made her son grew more and more dim. She began to drink, and the drinking rapidly became very heavy, so heavy that people began to refer to her as an alcoholic. After several embarrassing incidents at parties, she had to be forbidden to drink anything but dubonnet. What's dubonnet? I need to look that up. Dubonnet. That is 28% alcohol by volume, which, okay, it's an aperitif. Does everyone know what dubonnet is? It's, I don't know. It's like a French thing. Oh, the French version is 14% ABV. It's the favorite drink of Queen Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So it's like red wine and a bunch of spices. Okay, cool. Well, that's dubonnet. So that's what Mary's drinking. They're like, oh, she has a problem with drinking. Let's just give her a certain type of wine. Surely that will fix it. We don't have to fix anything about her home life or her husband who sucks and is constantly hooking up with 24-year-olds. At one park department Christmas party at the Arsenal, obsequious Moses men, anxious to ingratiate themselves with the boss's wife, kept coming up to her and asking if she'd like one. And she had so many glasses of the light cordial that when Mrs. Hellman arrived and asked where she was told with a sneer, oh, she had to be taken home. She was hospitalized several times in an attempt to cure either her drinking or the increasingly serious attacks of what Moses aide General Harry L. Myers refers to as nervous trouble. At the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic, one, for what Myers says, was quite a long time. I did not really like that chapter. I mean, I loved reading that chapter, but wow, that chapter was a bummer. This guy kind of sucks to the people in his life, huh? Okay, next chapter is 27, and it's called Changing. And there was a different chapter called Changing before, so it looks like we're changing once again. So here's how it starts. This feels very like spoken word poetry night at Brandeis or something. Power and personality, period. Interplay, period. The young Robert Moses, immersed in his dreams, had been totally uninterested in power. And if he had later sought it, he had for years sought it only for his dreams. The seeking had been solely on behalf of the vision. If at last monumental power had been sought and used, it had been sought and used as a means to a monumental end. But Moses' personality made him particularly susceptible to the addiction of power, and now he had been a mainliner for years. And while he had always before sought power only for the sake of his dreams, now for the first time, he began to seek power for power's own sake, as an end in and for itself. That a turning point had been reached became apparent in 1936 when the New York City Tunnel Authority was created. No sooner had Moses learned that Mayor LaGuardia was considering establishing an authority to build a $58 million Queens Midtown Tunnel than he began hinting, none too subtly, that he would like to be on it, if not in charge of it. But the tunnel could be financed only with federal funds, and LaGuardia only recently recovered from Order Number 129 Imbroglio. Was, by the way, the most boring chapter that I can remember, so I'm not going to be going over that. Was not about to put himself again in the position of asking for federal money for a man who was personally obnoxious in the extreme, to the head of the federal government. Nor did the mayor see any reason to. The tunnel was not intended to link up with any Moses projects. There were engineers available outside Moses' organization, most notably Ole Singstad, a cocky, hard-driving, table-pounding Norwegian who had designed the then novel ventilation system that had made the Holland Tunnel feasible, who, after tunnel designer Clifford M. Holland collapsed. I was about to say, what a coincidence that the Holland Tunnel was designed by a guy named Clifford M. Holland, but then I immediately realized it's probably not a coincidence. Collapsed and died from overwork. That's crazy. Next time you go through the Holland Tunnel, think about that. Think about how Mr. Holland just keeled over and died when he finished. Okay. Old Singstad, after Clifford M. Holland died, rammed the job through to completion, and who was regarded as the world's leading authority on underwater vehicular tunnels. Directing Chief Legislative Representative Reuben A. Lazarus to draft the legislation, creating the new authority, LaGuardia ordered him, "Leave the son of a bitch off." What? Why? Wouldn't you want the leading authority in vehicular underwater tunnels? Or are they saying to leave off Moses? They're saying to leave off Moses. That makes a lot more sense. Of course you want the leader in underwater vehicular tunnels. That was easy. Lazarus simply left out the phrase that Moses had included in the legislation, setting up the other authorities to which he wanted to be appointed. The phrase stating that an unsalaried state official shall not be eligible for appointment, and thereby left Moses, as a state official, ineligible for appointment to the city body. Too bad. So sad. Good thing he has 20 million other appointments and boards on that he's on. Recalls Lazarus, "I had a hell of a row with Moses over that. It started off very temperate, with Moses asking me why I did it, and couldn't it be changed so he could be on it? I said, I had direction on it. He said, that Guinea son of a bitch asked you to do this, didn't he? I said, Bob, he's my client, you're not. I hope that's not a bad word. I don't know. Moses then attempted to have his upstate Republican friends in the legislature kill the bill. How does he has? I don't know how he has upstate friends, because I guess like I just remember how many upstate people don't like him because he took all the money for parks from their upstate projects. But I guess he has. Oh, it's an old timey slur. Okay, well, don't ever make a supercut of me saying that because I didn't mean it and I feel bad. And LaGuardia named as authority commissioners 3 businessmen, 2 personal friends, William H. Friedman and Albert T. Johnson, and Alfred B. Jones, a mild-mannered Quaker who, not coincidentally, was a cousin of RFC chairman Jesse Jones. RFC? RFC really makes me think like requests for comment, like on Wikipedia. What's RFC? Republican? What is RFC chairman? It's of course, it's the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Obviously. How could I not think of that? Okay, that doesn't even matter. Unable to obtain control of the new authority directly, Moses tried indirection, sending aides discreetly to ask Singstad, who had been appointed the authority's chief engineer, if he would cooperate with Triborough. But Moses was trying his wiles on the wrong man. Singstad, fiercely independent, despised Moses' aides, who he felt violated engineering ethics every time they subordinated their own objective views of an engineering problem to tell the Triborough chairman what he wanted to hear. One morning, after other approaches had failed, millionaire Jack Madigan himself dropped by Singstad's office and invited Ole to the downtown athletic club for lunch. On the way, Madigan said, Ole, I want to be helpful. You and the tunnel authority would be better off with a strong man like Moses in charge. Quote, I figured Moses was trying to get me on his side as a talking point for LaGuardia for a takeover, Singstad says. Let me remind myself of the names. Yes, it's Ole Singstad. That's the table-pounding Norwegian engineer, the leading vehicular underwater tunnel engineer, by the way. Okay, so he says, I figured Moses was trying to get me on his side as a talking point to LaGuardia for a takeover. Moses, he felt, wanted to be able to tell the mayor that the chief engineer had said his commissioners were not competent to run the job. I said I was sticking with my commissioners and I was happy with them. Unable to control the new authority directly or indirectly, Moses set out to destroy it. It was under tremendous pressure to produce results fast. 1936 was a presidential election year, and Harold Ickes, remember Harold Ickes and how much of his diary we had to read? I do. Harold Ickes, whose PWA was financing the tunnel, wanted the president to be able to break ground well before November. They didn't want to have $58 million lying idle in an election year, Singstad says. Assembling an engineering and administrative staff from scratch and producing in a matter of a few months plans for a huge and complicated engineering job, Singstad had to draw more than 125 separate studies before he hit on a feasible plan for the Manhattan entrance. It was immensely difficult. And Ickes was adamant. If work was not underway well before Election Day, he said, the grant would be rescinded and there would be no tunnel. I'm a little bit more curious about what I don't know. I'm more curious about the history of tunnels in New York. I feel like we got a lot about all the bridges that have existed. Well, a little bit about that. I'm more curious about the tunnels. Would you go to a museum that was all about tunnels, like the Tunnel Museum that talks about tunnels, like both like engineered tunnels and also like cave type tunnels? Wouldn't that be fun? I would go to that. Anyway, the PWA administrator, Ickes, was demanding weekly progress reports, and every week his impatience grew more noticeable. Delay might kill the project. And Moses sought delay. His legislative allies introduced a bill that would have rescinded the authority's authorization to construct the tunnel and provided instead for a year-long state finance study of whether the crossing should be a tunnel or a bridge, which under the terms of the act creating the Triborough Authority, only Triborough could build. Enactment of the new bill into law would have meant the end of the tunnel no matter what the study's result. Ickes was constantly threatening to take money away from us if we didn't get started, Singstad says. I wish I could do a Norwegian accent for all these old Singstad quotes, but unfortunately, I just know that it wouldn't be good, so I'm not going to try. Moses knew damn well that if another year was spent on the state finance study, the money, aka the PWA grant, would be gone to some other state. There was no real chance of enactment, of course, since Lehman would veto the bill if it passed the Republican-controlled legislature. But Moses didn't need enactment to accomplish his purpose. He needed only delay, and he used all his vast influence in Albany to obtain it, keeping the bill bottled up in committee and off Lehman's desk, where it could finally be disposed of week after week. And all the time, I have a cat in my way, and all the time, Singstad says, Ickes was hammering, if you don't do it now, I'm going to withdraw the money. But LaGuardia understood that he was in a power struggle now, and while the mayor may have deferred to Moses on questions of park administration, he deferred to no one on questions of power. Traveling to Washington week after week, he kept the grant alive until the last day of the legislative session, when the bill was finally brought to the floor and defeated. And on October 2, 1936, President Roosevelt was able to break ground for the tunnel. Why did Moses try to wreck the tunnel authority? Singstad says. Because he couldn't take it over. That's why, damn it. He couldn't take it over, and so he wanted to wreck the whole damn project. Lazarus and Corporation Counsel Paul Widdells, who were on the inside of the battle from beginning to end, thinking it over independently, came to the same conclusion. I kept trying to understand what his reason was for trying to take over the tunnel authority, Lazarus says, and I just couldn't make sense out of any of it, unless he wanted to take over every construction job in the city. And in fact, Moses' actions in his fight with the tunnel authority in 1936, particularly when coupled with his actions in the struggle with the authority over the next decade, made it difficult to ascribe to them any other motivation. Search as one may through the record, not only the public record, which is scanty indeed, because the fight was carried on largely in secrecy, but through confidential memoranda and letters culled from LaGuardia's files and files of other principals involved. One is unable to identify a single real difference of opinion between Moses and the authority on any point of substance relevant to the planning, construction, or administration of the Queens Midtown Tunnel. Moses agreed that a crossing was needed. His argument that a crossing should not be a tunnel but a bridge was never presented with any of the thoroughness that marked his serious proposals. It was never really presented seriously at all, possibly in the view of at least one of his aides, because it couldn't be presented seriously, since building a bridge at 37th Street would have meant condemning so many office buildings and apartment houses that the condemnation alone that cost would have been ridiculously high. Moses never even commissioned a preliminary engineering survey of the bridge proposal. His only real difference of opinion with the tunnel authority was over who should control it. And this difference made the 1936 Tunnel Authority fight a watershed in Robert Moses's life. Always before, Moses had conceived a public work, and then had sought the public to bring it into reality. In the Tunnel Authority fight, somebody else conceived the public work. Moses sought the power to take it over. Before, his motivation had always been the work, the project, the achievement, the dream. Now, the motivation was power. And the Tunnel Authority fight also revealed the lengths to which Robert Moses was now prepared to go to gain power. Wrecking the authority would have cost the city not only $58 million, money which would provide a lot of jobs in depression-racked New York, but also the tunnel, a public work badly needed in terms of Moses' own aims, the elimination of traffic congestion in New York City. But these considerations did not deter him. If he couldn't build the tunnel, his actions said, no one was going to build it. If he couldn't take it over, he would destroy it. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Wow. There's a lot I'm excited for. I really hope that the Sesame Street producer comes up again, but I just don't really think she will. I'm excited for more of the just like when somebody is introduced with 3 adjectives and one of them is table whacking. I'm excited for that. I feel like we might get some good drama there. And yeah. Oh wow, this chapter is really short actually. We only have only 2 more pages in it. And then the next chapter is titled The Warp on the Loom. And I don't even know really, I guess I can imagine a loom that has water damage or something, but I don't actually really know what that means, and so that's exciting. And The Warp on the Loom is a longer chapter. I'm going to Portland this week, which is kind of this weekend. I'll try to read when I'm there. It's kind of crazy because I was in Portland earlier this year in February-ish. I remember reading this book when I was there. And I didn't expect to go to Portland again. It's not like I have that many connections in Portland. I just happen to have 2 things that are flying me out to Portland. This one's a conference. I'm really excited. Okay, so it looks like there's 30 pages of, after we finish this chapter, there's 30 pages of the next chapter, and then it's section 6, the lust for power. So that's kind of fun. Okay, see you later. I hope you have a good Tuesday.